In the heavyweight division coming up this weekend, we have a man that's in the D tier list of nicknames. It's the aptly named Marcin Tybura taking on Blagoy Baga Ivanov. And for Ivanov, I mean, this is a guy that in Bulgaria, he has a no contest where the ring broke like it was WWF against Alir Latifi. He also got stabbed in the heart in a barroom brawl and spent 86 days in a coma, only for those crazy Bulgarians to make him walk out of the hospital to see the reporters, where he looked like the shell of a man. And if you look at Ivanov, he's younger than Marcin Tybura. He looks like he could be his father. And the other part about it is, Blagoy Ivanov, younger than Robert Pattinson, does not wear it well. And maybe that's what happens when he gets stabbed in the heart. But for Blagoy Ivanov, former Bellator main eventer, he won a litany of fights. He went 4-1 with Bellator, won 4 in a row, lost to Alexander Volkov at Bellator 120. And then he takes a year off, fights with World Series, and in his first fight wins the belt. And then defends it all the way up to when they became PFL. He won in the inaugural PFL, but it wasn't like the $1 million championship. They were still kind of trying to figure things out. They needed Kevin Hart and Tony Robbins to set them straight. And Wiz Khalifa. Nobody writes songs to get high to anymore. Wiz Khalifa. That was a tweet. But when you look at this fight, Matt, as off the rails as I've been so far, Blagoy Ivanov, 2008 Combat Sambo. Did he beat Fedor in that tournament?
Also, what year did you just say?
2008.
15 years ago?
The man in Blagoy Ivanov, I mean, this guy, you know exactly what you're going to get. A guy that's going to take you down. He's going to rinse and repeat. So wait, what? He doesn't do any of that in the UFC? 80% of the time in his UFC fights, he strikes from distance? What? Yeah, that's what Blagoy Ivanov has done in the UFC. He's spent a lot of time wearing on his opponents in the clinch up against the cage, letting his opponents clinch him up to then conserve energy. And when he strikes, he just kind of lets it all hang out. And he dropped Tai Tuivasa. He landed a nice shot against him, dropped him in the first round. You look at the wins, you look at the losses. Ivanov lost in a main event slot against Junior Dos Santos in his UFC debut. His other losses are against Derek Lewis by split, who's in the main event, and Augusto Sakai by split, who I thought Blagoy won that fight, but Blagoy's last time out beat Marcos Rogerio de Lima. Fans were kind of split on who they actually thought won that fight, but it was close. He's taking on Marcin Tybura, and both of these guys former champs from regional organizations. Marcin, the former M1 Global champ. Marcin's fought the way better level competition just in the UFC from the sheer number of fights that he's had. But if you look at it for Tybura, even in the last sample size, since 2020, beat Sergey Spivac, Max Grecian, Ben Rothwell, Greg Hardy, Walt Harris, loses Alexander Volkov in one of the worst fights you're ever going to see. And his last time out, majority decision win over Alexander Romanov that most people thought should have been a draw. He gets 10-8'd in the first round, and then he rallies back really well round 2, round 3.
These guys are both entering a weird stage of their career, though, and it's not a common stage that heavyweights get to. Remember when Joanne Wood, formerly known as Calderwood, got into that stage where it was like, okay, even if the fight plan goes perfectly, you're probably winning by a split decision. Both these guys have kind of entered that territory. Like, Blagoy Ivanov is great defensively, like you had mentioned, especially with his takedown attempts. Striking's going to be a lot of 50-50 on the in-between, and that's why it's really hard for him to just not only win rounds, but just create a lot of distance between him and his opponent inside of a lot of those rounds. And that's why this fight could either be really exciting or terrible.
Oh, I think it's going to be bad.
This is why. Marcin Tybura at one point of his career was a good striker. He was kind of fast on his feet. He was a little bit faster back and forth, and he threw a lot more kicks. Again, go back and watch the Verdum fight. He throws a head kick in the 5th round that, hurts Verdum at one point. He doesn't really do a lot of that anymore, and he has gone a lot more towards the clinch, towards the takedowns, and he's very talented at all those things, but he has kind of neglected the one area of his game that I think he'd have an advantage in this matchup. If he was able to stand at kicking range with Blagoy Ivanov, I know it would make him more susceptible to the takedown in a matchup like this, but I think he'd still be able to throw a lot more offense from that range.
Yeah, and I think what you're just considering the last 2 Tybura fights. The fight against Alexander Romanov, the fight against Volkov. I thought his striking, again, round 2, round 3 looked good against the tired Romanov, but the fights against Walt Harris and Greg Hardy, the striking to then blend in his takedowns, Tybura was able to go out there.
But it was a lot more wrestling that won in those matchups. Again, Tybura back in the day was a movement guy. He would bounce back and forth and throw kicks. We have not seen that in a number of years now.
But you consider it in this matchup, Matt, and I went on Nate Latshaw's site to try and give me an idea of some of those striking numbers. I already mentioned it. 80% from distance is what Blagoy Ivanov's been doing in the UFC. He's had 6 fights there. He's at a negative .77 strike differential on the outside and spends 80% of his time there. Now, he is a tricky southpaw, and he did throw that kind of like weird step-in hook that he was able to drop to Tuivasa in their fight. But you consider for Ivanov out of the wins, Rothwell, Tuivasa, he beat by decision. That one ages really well, even though it wasn't a great fight. It was a sloppy heavyweight fight. It was. But you consider for Tybura, I mean, again, the wins, the losses, the MMA math, some guys that they've lost to.
He looked bad in that Volkov fight.
Yeah, he lost to Sakai, lost to Abdurkhimov back in 2019, lost to Lewis, and lost to Verdum. Now, he was beating Lewis until the dying seconds of that third round. But if you do consider it in a matchup like this, Matt, Ivanov plods around. I mean, again, he has that combat sambo lineage, but he doesn't really use it in a lot of his fights. Rogerio de Lima was able to take him down in their last fight. So he's not as big on the offensive takedown as he once was. And for Tybura, he is bigger on the offensive takedown, and his striking slowed down in some of these matchups. So it is tough to tell what you're going to get. Even though I've spent quite a bit of time at AKA as well as Extreme Couture training for some of these matchups. For Marcin Tybura out of Ankos MMA with Michael Andrazik and Jan Blachowicz as well as some of his training partners. So good guys to get you ready for a matchup like this. Tybura is the favorite, about a 2-1 in the matchup. We'll have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. Surprised us, they are to you. I think they're going to be somewhat close.
I do too.
Even though Tybura hit as a giant underdogs last time out against Romanov, I'm going to say over under 70% Tybura.
I think it'll be under.
I said, wow. 984 total votes, 86% Tybura, 80% by decision. For the 14% that I have Ivanov, 72% by decision. I gotta be honest with you guys, before I did the tape study and wrote any notes, I thought Blagoy Ivanov was gonna win this fight. I'm dead serious. That's not a joke, and I'm not just saying that to pump the video up. I thought Blagoy Ivanov could slow down Marcin Tybura and get a win. And I think he still could.
Yeah.
But I think Tybura is a little bit more of an active striker from distance, and I think his striking is better than Blagoy Ivanov's. I think he can back up quicker than Blagoy Ivanov can. I think he can avoid some of the power shots, and I think at this stage of their careers, Marcin Tybura's offensive grappling is a little bit better than Blagoy Ivanov, although the accolades are there. Blagoy was a great fighter with Bellator, great fighter with World Series, so-so fighter in the UFC. So for Ivanov, he could land some of those big power shots that we know him for, but I just like the activity out of Tybura a little bit more.
I just think Ivanov is the counter for a lot of what Tybura does well. Like, if Tybura is going to go for a wrestling-heavy game plan, well, Ivanov's pretty good defending takedowns, especially up against the cage, especially with his upper body. On the outside, I do favor Tybura, but I do think there has been a significant regression in some of his striking. Like, even go back to the Greg Hardy fight. Yes, he TKOs him by ground and pound. He got lit up on the feet in the first round of that fight. Like, Greg Hardy was piecing Marcin Tybura up. He was a lot faster, and I could see Ivanov kind of getting Marcin Tybura to close the distance a little bit too fast and catching him with some shots, but I still think Tybura is the more well-rounded between these two guys. I think it is going to be a close matchup. It's probably not going to be the best fight to watch, if we're being completely honest, but I do have Marcin Tybura.
Both of us going with the D-list nicknamed Marcin Tybura to get the win. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have in a battle of heavyweights, Tybura and Ivanov. Our next fight coming up, Jung taking on Devin Clark. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.